one of the deeper philosophical questions I'm currently wrestling with is, what is the line between politics and religion?
Maybe this is why those political systems that have best left room for religion end up having more of a harmony than those that
Yeah.
try and suffocate that out, which is, technically what the communists did.
But I guess the extent to which politics then is working well is the extent to which it is local, right? Because once you get into this non-local global politics, fiat war machine thing, then all of a sudden it really becomes about breaking rules and taxation and inflation, like all these crazy things that are very distinctly unethical.
All the AI dudes were like radical atheists.
Yes.
They literally are trying to build an AI god.
Yes.
It's the funniest shit to watch, and they're all
Yeah.
sitting there like bowing at the altar of AGI.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Humans have a basic religious impulse, right? And if you remove religion from the equation, that religious impulse gets attached to something else.
Like, when you see real courage, it really shakes you inside. I don't know what it is. Like,
Sure.
it's something that sort of transcends words, right?
Yeah.
Like, you see it, you feel it, and it fucking moves you. Courage is faith in action, maybe you could even.
All right, yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I think we're on the verge of seeing something like that again, which is obviously the whole point of why the hell I decided to write this book, is that something is shifting, something is changing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer.
Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. Alex Svetski, welcome back to the What is Money Show.
Robert Breedlove, thank you for having me again.
So good to have you. You're probably the #1 repeat guest on this show, I think. I'm not sure. We've had a lot of good conversations, and today we're going to be taking a look at your upcoming book, The Bushido of Bitcoin, and just working our way a bit through the prelude, which sets up kind of the framework for the book, your motivations for writing it, and where you see the world going post Bitcoin.
Yep.
So thank you again for joining me, good sir. How have you been?
I appreciate it, man. Look, I've been really good. I've been focusing in on this. I've been focusing in on sort of wrapping up our AI experiment and open sourcing everything there, giving that to the community. As we spoke really briefly before the call, I think I feel like I've done my 5,000 hours at least. I didn't reach 10,000 hours, but I've done my 5,000 hours in the AI space, and I think I can put that largely behind me now, and say that there is some interesting stuff here, but it is very much a Gartner hype cycle that seems to continue happening because there's an AI winter every time there's an AI boom. But yeah, man, I've been focusing on that, focusing on the AI project dropped the interesting seed for a product that could use AI instead of, so I'm kind of formulating the company into something that is more AI enhanced, not AI focused, which is a really important distinction. So, but other than that, yeah, man, almost done with this book. God knows how many drafts in, God knows how many rewrites. I don't even want to think about it at this stage. Like every time I go in there, I'm like, oh, I could change that. Like, you kind of like slap yourself. Like, if I keep doing this, I'm going to release the book in 2140 when the last block is out.
Yeah, it must be a tricky. I mean, I can't relate. I mentioned to you, I just finished a rough draft of like a 30-page essay, which is, pales in length compared to what you've written here. And there's a weird balance that you must strike between editing it for quality and not making perfect the enemy of the good, right? You got to, I don't know, find that middle ground somewhere. Is just selfishly, I would like to ask first, like, is there anything about your writing process that you've found that works especially well? Anything, maybe bad habits you've discarded or anything you've refined going through writing this book? And what does that look like?
Something that's really helped me with writing the book, honestly, is the first thing I do when I get up in the morning, before I get onto meetings or anything like that, is I try and do some writing. And I've almost sort of made it a habit because I guess, and maybe this is just a function of having slept or whatever, I seem to be more able to write. And then obviously at the end, like if I save the writing till the end of the day, one, it would be sloppy, and two, I don't think I'd just have the mental vitality or energy to actually put good words on the page. So I think that's one. I think another one as well is, I mean, these days, honestly, I don't read as much as I used to, because I'm really busy. But whenever I am listening to something useful, whether it's a podcast or if I am reading something, I just keep a notepad open for like ideas that I sort of suck in. And then I like to sit down and extrapolate those ideas a little bit. And then I guess having a rolling draft that's been going on for a little while, I'm able to actually like, because the book is still top of mind, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, that would actually really go well here. That would go well here. Now, I will say this is kind of like a double-edged sword because sometimes I forget that I've already actually written about that somewhere else. So then I'll like repeating myself. And then when I go back and do a reread, I'm like, wait a minute, I just fucking spoke about this like,
Yeah.
5 chapters back. So then, like, so it is a little bit tricky, which in fact brings up one interesting thing. You know, the saying of like, you never step in the
Same river twice.
something like that. Yeah, right.
It's
Like,
not the same river
so
and it's not the same man.
exactly. And one of, I think, the challenges that I've had in writing this book is I've changed significantly in the last 2 years since I started writing it. And I can see like when I go back and see some of the early stuff. So now what you read in the prelude actually was at the end of the book. And when I was, me and the editor were recently doing some edits, he's like, look, he goes, I can actually see your evolution in thinking from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. So he's like, you should take, so a bunch of this prelude stuff, he said, look, bring that into the front, set a strong stage for the book, and then look to adapt all of the other things, because he goes, I can see that you've changed as a person, you've matured a lot. And my editor is about 10 years older than both of us. Like, so he's, obviously had a bit more life experience, all that sort of background. And like I could see you coming along that path. So that's been something tricky for me to contend with actually as well, is, maybe, this whole thing about like spending many, many, many years writing a book is, maybe not the best idea. Maybe it's like better to just like punch them out because they establish who you are at a particular point in time, and then, write something later. So I know this is something I don't know the right answer to this. I grapple with it because I even look back on Uncommunist now and I'm like, man, there's things I would actually change in there. And I wonder, does that mean I write a part two? is it good that I just published that one then? Like, would I do it differently now? I don't know. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably inevitable, right? Like you said,
Mm.
like if you're always
Mm-hmm.
changing, that once you imprint something or put the book in print, right, and it's static and it's not changing anymore, well, then you're going to start to deviate from some of the things you said in that book almost by necessity, right? You continue to be a dynamic process, a person that's growing and changing, and the book is just frozen in time in a way. So, yeah, I can relate to that too. Like I've gone and tried to pull quotes out of my old writing sometimes for tweets when I'm feeling lazy. And I'm like, wait, what? I see something that I wrote. I'm like, what? Like I would change this and change that. And
Yeah.
um, that's funny.
It's
Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say it's I think particularly over the last couple years, and maybe this is just a historical anomaly, I think a lot of us like really changed. Like there's almost like a line between pre-2020 version of us and post-2020 version of us.
Yeah,
And I know at least for me that's very strong. Like I look back at my early Bitcoin articles when, back in the days when you and I were still like unknown, right? Like, we're writing these like things about time and evolution and history and all this sort of stuff. And you look at it and it's good, but it's got like a level of innocence to it. Whereas, now you sort of look at it, you're
yeah,
like, you did good, bro, but like,
yeah,
this.
yeah. I think, yeah. When I read that stuff or like I look back on it, I see, yeah, we were well intentioned. I think
Mhm,
even kind of like have a big picture intelligence in a way, right? We're kind of like
mhm, mhm, mhm.
trying to look at things from the highest perspective we were capable of at the time. But in doing that, you pick up a lot of generality by necessity, and
Yes.
so you lose a lot of finer detail, right? And so people can kind of pick apart some of the things you say. They're like, oh, like for instance, what's a for instance? I may have said in like Bitcoin and the tyranny of time scarcity that money is like a measurement system for time. And then
Mhm,
someone's like,
mhm,
oh no, it's not, you can't measure money's not a measurement system because money has to do with value and value is immeasurable because it's subjective. So like
mhm,
there's all these
mhm.
like you're trying to like draw these analogies to make it palatable for people's cognition, but in doing this so you lose some specificity at times. It sort of opens you up to critique, I guess.
Yeah, but I guess as you said earlier, that's the process of us sharpening ourselves, right? Like
Right.
it's necessarily, and I think that's part of it's both the beauty and the tragedy of doing things in public, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna release stuff, and some of it's gonna flop, some of it's gonna fail, some of it's gonna be great, some of it's not, and I think you and I have both been people that have been run through the ringer out in the public, in our own ways. And
Yeah.
like, but we're sort of the men in the arena, right? We're trying shit out, and
Yes.
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, amen. Part of the creative process, and I think good to go through that in many ways. So, anyways, I don't want to keep. I want to get into your content here because there's so much good stuff. Obviously, we could riff forever, but I want to definitely throw some light on the work you've done here. So, we're just going to do the usual thing. I'll read some excerpts, and then we'll riff on the ideas, and then obviously feel free to jump in anywhere you like. And then if there's an excerpt you want to read, please feel free. I'm going to start on page, again, we're looking at the prelude of your book, which is The Bushido of Bitcoin. And I think this, speaking of changing, this particular excerpt sort of sets up, where you're coming from, right? Who you are, who you used to be, and I guess getting into some of your motivation for writing the book. So this is on page 8 in the prelude. You write, I spent most of my 20s as a raging atheist, but I entered my 30s. But as I entered my 30s, I began to slowly find my way back to a deeper appreciation for religion, because in whatever flavor it comes, it attempts to contend with many of these questions. Theology is a study of what matters, and in a world so caught up in the quote unquote study of matter, it's arguably never been more important. Secularists thought we could transcend or ignore it, but instead we found that the void left by religion would only be filled by something else, which is often more which is often much uglier, shallower, and less robust. It's why many atheists resemble that description. See Sam Harris. I think that gets into physiognomy. Is that what it's called?
Physiognomy,
Yeah,
yeah.
physiognomy. Um, Next paragraph, you write Matthew Arnold, the Victorian poet known for his reflections on education and critiques on a society becoming ever more secular, defined religion as, quote, morality touched by emotion, unquote. This is not only a beautiful description, but accurate in many ways. Religion is concerned with meaning, and much of meaning is an embodied phenomenon. It's something we feel, and without it, we find ourselves feeling less and less. In my opinion, it's a big part of why we live in an era of unprecedented depression, nihilism, and hedonism. Whatever your viewpoint on the definition or practice of religion, you cannot deny that there is an emptiness in its absence. Just go visit a church in Italy or walk through the streets built during the periods of high religion. Then go find yourself a modern office or government building and walk the streets of a new techno city. See how each makes you feel. I really like that concluding point there. And the quote that came up for me as I was reading this passage is from Kierkegaard. And he said, what looks like politics and imagines itself to be political will one day unmask itself as a religious movement. And so when I read this quote, and I see you sort of getting at it here in the passage, one of the deeper philosophical questions I'm currently wrestling with is what is the line between politics and religion? Um, Politics is something like that which relates to power dynamics or power relationships among people. Specifically like as it pertains to the state, typically, right? Who's authorized to do what and who's not authorized to do what. And religion is obviously much deeper, has to do with kind of deeper questions, but they're both orienting narratives, if I could use a general term. So
That's a good term.
how do you think about politics versus religion, and how do you substantively distinguish between the two?
Yeah, I think, man, there's definitely a lot of threads to pull on this one. I've been in a lot of the book, I tried to lean into this idea of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And we live far more in a cerebral age.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways you know we've come to believe things like mind over matter, and like
Mm-hmm.
the body and the mind are two separate things, etc. And Nietzsche talked about this a lot. Is he sort of created this term called physiopsychology, that like
Mm.
the body and the mind are intertwined. You can't just
Yes.
separate them,
Right.
look at them as two distinct things. And it's funny, while there's simultaneously a movement towards like normie land and normie world, separating the two and kind of discarding the body as like a meat suit, and the brain is the thing. There's also like a movement of, I guess, people like us who are realizing that there's a synthesis between the two that is far more profound. And I grapple with that in a lot of the book. And I think one of the points I tried to make there in here is that you know theology or religion comes from a place of feeling, comes from a place
Mm.
that's more embodied
Mm.
than just what is logical. You know what I mean? It's not
Mm-hmm.
just oh yeah, this is the best way of doing something because it makes logical utilitarian sense.
Mm.
It's like something deeper. And I think that's my best way to maybe try and delineate between
Mm-hmm.
politics and religion, is that
Mm-hmm.
politics, I've got later in the book, I've got a definition, and I'll read a quick quote to sort of frame this. It says, what is politics? Politics originally referred to the affairs of the city and its governance. It comes from the Greek politikos, meaning of, for, or relating to the citizens. Now, I say today it carries a broader meaning, which I would sum up as the game of the game of social influence and power.
Mm.
This comes in a section where I talk about specifically power and money. So, to your point earlier, it's like an orienting story, or what did you call it? An orienting
Yeah, an orienting narrative. Yeah.
narrative, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So they are fundamentally orienting narratives. I would maybe just argue that the small delineation between them, maybe the distinction between them, and it's a very fine distinction. These things in life are always like complicated and they're not clear cut, but maybe it is something to do with the transcendent. But maybe I'm wrong here, because I was about to say that politics is less something you feel, maybe more something you think. But people are obviously go on Twitter and everyone's yelling, kicking, bitching, screaming about like who's right politically. So maybe it is, maybe Kierkegaard is right in this sense. It is fundamentally a religious thing. So I don't know. I don't have a I guess I don't have an answer, but it's a thing definitely worth pondering.
Yeah, yeah, it is very tricky for sure. And I think your first point's well taken, right? That we have sort of over-indexed on the cerebral aspect of being human. Vervaeke often talks about the four levels of knowing, and he calls that propositional knowing, right? Like to know what something is. But that comes at the exclusion of, or the overemphasis on that leads to the de-emphasis of what he calls procedural knowing, participatory knowing, and perspectival knowing. I think procedural is knowing how, participatory is like knowing what it's like to be a part of something basically, and perspectival is being able to look at the world through the eyes of others in a way. And that last one, that perspectival, is, I think it's very closely related to spirituality in a technical sense of the word. Heidegger's definition of spirit was the I that is in we and the we that is in I. That sounds like
Yeah,
woo-woo at first, but
that's
then
very perspectival. Yeah.
when you consider that children actually mature by internalizing the perspectives of other people, right? Like the child, like initially, whatever goes into the cookie jar and mom has to say no. Well, eventually that child matures and they know not to go in the cookie jar by internalizing that representation of mom that said, hey, don't do that for whatever reason, right? So it's literally the I, the we that's an I and the I that's in we, that we're always internalizing representations of one another to really become moral agents, right? To become civilized humans. And so that whole idea of like seeing through the eyes of other people is a spiritual thing technically. And I don't know, politics and religion are sort of both. I'm not sure, because religion is what? It's trying to say like, here's the things you should do and here's the things you shouldn't do. So there's like a moral condemnation of certain actions and a moral celebration of other actions. And then politics is used, so that's maybe a little more, I don't know, like there's less direct punishment, right? Whereas politics is using the stick of the state, so to speak, to actually get people to do certain things and not do other things. So maybe that's the overlap, is like actually trying to harmonize patterns of human action in a certain way towards a certain end.
Guiding behavior and norms and stuff like that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. The thing is, see about politics though, is it extends like beyond the state, right? So you have politics in the workplace, you have politics amongst your friends, so like the more abstracted nature of politics to me seems to be more about a game of influence. Now, in a statist paradigm, I guess that opens the door for all sorts of funny characters who want to get influence for all sorts of funny reasons,
Yeah.
and kind of bring us to the sort of state we have. But I think, and I don't want to speak for you, but I know at least for myself is like I feel like I've gone beyond a lot of the libertarian sort of ideals at this point, particularly writing this book. It's like it's pushed me beyond that, and it's pushed me to kind of look at libertarianism as like very logically sound, and theoretically useful, but practically inapplicable, because the psychological assumption is that in a libertarian sort of environment, everyone is of a high degree of agency, and unfortunately the world just doesn't work like that. We
Right.
saw we saw the degree of people's agency, or the degree of the masses agency, a couple of years ago when, someone said jump and they said how high, right? So like, it's very tough to reconcile that psychological reality with the pure raw economic reality of, sort of the libertarian creed.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess where I'm going with that is that as I was a libertarian, I would sit there and say things like, politics is evil, like as a blanket thing. But I've come to appreciate that we can never escape politics or politicking.
Mm-hmm.
There must always be some sort of framework for orienting behavior. And I guess this, I'm coming back to this, is like, it seems the distinction between religion and politics is more the transcendent component.
Right.
Because I guess politics is less concerned with the divine. It is more concerned with the actions on this realm, on this place. Maybe this is why those political systems that have best left room for religion end up having more of a harmony than those that try and suffocate that out, which is, technically what the communists did, right? What did they do first? They attacked the church. They wanted to dismantle religion so that they were the sole arbiters. They tried to say that there's nothing sacred. There is just the commune. And, maybe that's what's more important here, is that they bleed in different directions, but there is obviously an overlap.
Have you ever wanted to live in an off-grid community with complete food, energy, and water independence? If so, then you need to check out the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a pioneering community designed to foster longevity and well-being, eliminating elements that detract from these goals. At the farm, the convergence of nature, nutritious food, a supportive community, and the ethos of slowing down is unparalleled. Positioned at the gateway to the UNESCO World Heritage-nominated Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, the farm at Okefenokee stands as a testament to a lifestyle that truly nurtures health and happiness. Unlike conventional housing developments where a token communal garden may suffice, the farm itself is the community. Small, intimate micro-villages seamlessly integrate into the fabric of a sprawling agricultural community. So if you're interested in joining this off-grid community, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about becoming a member. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on their custom cabin pricing. Again, go to okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. I'd like to thank my friends at Swan Bitcoin for their long-standing support of the What is Money show. Swan's mission is to help millions of people get into Bitcoin, so they built the best solution to set up recurring Bitcoin buys and automatic withdrawals into cold storage. With the Swan app, it takes just 2 minutes to sign up and start buying Bitcoin. If you're a new customer, you get $10 in free Bitcoin for signing up, and the first $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy incurs zero fees. If you're an existing Swan customer, then the next $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy now incurs 0 fees. So if you love to recommend Bitcoin to friends and family, then Swan is the best place to start. So go to swanbitcoin.com/breedlove to get started today. Again, that's swanbitcoin.com/breedlove. Yeah, very complicated to talk about. The other thing that's coming up for me here is like the idea of ethics being the prescriptive, right? The what we should do. It's not descriptive necessarily. I mean, there's a component of like you're describing how humans are in a way. Like this is what I think private property sort of crosses both boundaries. It's like, okay, private property, which is basically saying everyone keeps what they earn, right? And is free to trade with one another and no one steals from each other. It's just like this social norm, right? That coheres civilization. Well, that's definitely prescriptive. That's saying, well, you shouldn't steal from one another, leave people free to keep the assets they justly acquire. But there's also a descriptive component to it because people sort of naturally have this possessiveness or territoriality built into us, right? Like, if you've ever seen any 2-year-old, like, oh, no, that toy is mine. You know, it's not like that kid has figured out private property. Like, they just, most social animals are territorial about their possessions. And again, extends beyond humans, it's to social animals. So, but it seems like ethics, although there might be a descriptive component to it, it's mainly the prescriptive, or it's telling us what we should, the actions we should or shouldn't do, the actions that are socially acceptable or socially condemned. And so I don't know, it's tricky too, because there's that old saying, eat first, then ethics. Like almost like ethics are a luxury, but it's a bit of a chicken and the egg problem, because if you think that way, then you never, to the extent you implement an ethical framework like private property and you don't steal from one another, well, then all of a sudden there's more food to eat, right? And then so you get a virtuous cycle of ethics begetting more ethics, and you get the opposite, right? If you say, oh no, we're just going to eat first before we establish ethics, it's like, well, you're never going to get out of like a basic existence. So it seems like somewhere in that milieu, religion was like the first thing that got us all pointed in the same direction, right? I kind of consider religion being the OG social technology from which ethics were born, that we all had to be pointed toward something. We had to entrain ourselves to pointing ourselves in one direction, right? Everyone cooperating towards a certain end. And from that entrainment towards one goal among a group, you start to develop ethical norms, right? That people figure out, oh, well, how are we best going to cooperate towards that goal? Well, it turns out private property actually works a lot better than dog eat dog world kind of thing, for instance. So, anyways, I don't know, that's just me kind of thinking out loud about how that works. And
There's actually a couple things I wanted to throw here. Is like, so for you, where does ethics sit? Is it sits more in the religious bucket or in the political bucket, or
well,
is it
that's the
both?
thing. That's why I'm like, that's the thing that spans the two, right? It's like
Yes.
religion's like the original social coordination technology, I think, was again just a hypothesis. So we figure out, oh, here's how we point all of our effort towards one thing, whatever that is, building the cathedral, whatever the thing is, the pyramid, whatever the thing, right? And again, this is grossly oversimplifying, right? There's a lot of probably coercion that goes into building that pyramid and stuff as well. But you at least get people entrained towards doing one thing, right? Like one common goal. And then the societies that figure out private property or ethics, for instance, they tend to outperform those that don't in pursuing that common goal. So they will then, well, they'll flourish, right? More than the people that don't adopt ethical principles. And then from ethics, you get legal systems, right? Which underpin political systems, that people following common laws. So again, I'm not saying this with like any degree of conviction, but it just seems like a logical sequence to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that ultimately, I don't know if one came before the other. I think these are, politics and religion are two things that have always coexisted. And I think because the line is blurred, it's impossible to know what came before, what came after, what influenced what, etc. Because like if you look at it, I mean, what's the Bible? 2,000 years old, the Old Testament, 3,000, whatever it is. I mean, Hammurabi's code is older than that, right? Like the Egyptians are older than that. And yes, they had their religions, but fundamentally Egypt was a political construct as well. It was a monarchy, which had which, and as you said, overgeneralizing here, but it was able to substantiate, I don't know if that's the right word here, but like validate its existence through a claim to the transcendent, right? The Pharaoh was
right. God King, right.
God on earth, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I guess the argument that I'd like to sort of close that on is, well, there's a couple things I want to say here, but I think you can't have politics without religion, and then I don't think you can also have religion without politics. I think they are both tied. I think probably the lesson for us is that we need both. And the thing about religion is that it comes in different flavors. I know that there are militant Christians out there, there are militant Muslims and all this sort of other different creeds, but fundamentally, like if that tells you anything, it tells you that there is different flavors, and it's not a bad thing. In fact, I think it's a good thing, because that sort of blend of politics and religion, I think, is what gives you culture, or it's a big part of culture. And then when you have different cultures, you have different modalities and views and perspectives. We were talking about perspectival stuff earlier. In the world. So I think that that all fits. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention is eat first and ethics later. I think once again, there's probably like a spectrum here, and there's no hard and fast rule. But the eat first is far more individualist, and I think that applies to maybe it applies on the ends of the spectrum. Like in a really large context. So like many people. Eat first is probably the orientation to get ahead, and then later. And then in a really like small, survival, I'm by myself, eat first. But anywhere in between, I feel like the ethics component becomes increasingly important. And maybe there's like some sort of local maxima there, which is, at a particular size, like, we have to worry about ethics first. And a warrior collective, like something that I really explore in here, and later in the book, which we'll discuss in a future pod, I talk about the difference between civilian ethics and warrior ethics, actually, and they're very different. Like in a civilian context, you're not going out there chasing adversity. Like in a civilian context, there's sort of Austrian economics applies, which is selfish action, toward economic ends. Whereas in a warrior collective, like you were punished far more in the Spartans, for example, you're punished far more for dropping your shield than your sword, because your number one goal was to protect the man beside you, not yourself.
Right.
So there's a different, so there's like warrior ethics are completely different. So these scales, the context, all this sort of stuff matters, but it's it's definitely really interesting to kind of grapple with that. And as I think we're alluding to here, is I don't think there's a definitive right answer. What's right for the culture, I guess.
It starts to feel like one of those limitations of language type things, right? Where any time you get a group of humans together, there are religious aspects and there are political aspects, and they go hand in hand in a way, right? Like obviously a more secular culture would probably be more political, but that doesn't mean you can dispense with the religious, right? There's something about there's some transcendent good toward which that group is aimed, right? Even if that's freedom or what it could be, just a totally secularized concept, but that transcendent good towards which it is aimed is what introduces the religious aspects to the group, whereas the political aspects are I guess a little more formal, right? A little more explicit typically. Maybe not entirely. There's also the power dynamics, but So I think of like obviously there's theocracies, right? Whereas you were saying that the pharaoh god kings, their political power was founded on their them being the access point to God, right? They're basically superhuman in a way, right? They're god kings and everyone else is sub god king, right? Human or slave or whatever the thing may be.
Maybe they were.
Yeah, maybe, who knows? And then you have like, more modern authoritarians attempting to deify themselves, right? You look at Mussolini and some of these guys, they're like, there's all the theatricality that goes into like making them look larger than life. And what's the defining feature of an authoritarian is the whole rules for thee, not for me thing, right? It's like, again, they're superhuman in the sense that they're above the law, or the rules don't apply to them. They are the rule maker. And so that's maybe where it becomes unethical in a way, because I think ethics, we could maybe say, are essentially embodied codes of conduct, right? As you said, and it applies differently to different groups, right? So with the warriors, part of their ethical action was to not drop their shield because that's what protects the man standing beside them. But that rule, don't drop your shield, basically is applied to everyone evenly, right? Like all of the warriors. Just like there's, whatever, do not steal, do not kill is more of like a civilian ethic. And so the even application of those principles of conduct seems to be in the sphere of ethics, whereas uneven, rules for thee, not for me kind of thing, you get into more authoritarian type regimes. And so maybe this is a line between religion and politics, is that at least the good and successful religions seem to teach equal rules, right? Like the 10 commandments, for instance, right? These are rules that everyone is supposed to follow. Whereas politics, and especially fiat politics, again, it depends what type of politics we're talking about, but there's an attempt. The point of politics in a way is to set the rules or even get in a position to be able to bend the rules or twist the rules, right? Such that you can benefit from them in a way, right? So this is a problem with, well, I mean, basically statism in general, that you get this
Yeah, I
bifurcation
think.
of taxpayers and tax consumers.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think you're talking more statism there though, because I don't think the like, and this is where it's hard, is like we're so jaded by modern politics, right? That it
yeah,
has become this
right,
game of statism and stealing and
right,
theft and parasitism and all this sort of stuff, that like we've lost touch with what the original essence of politics was, which was taking the polis, which is
yes,
the city, and the politis, I think it is. Let me double check what the word is, but for people, the citizenry, yeah, the politis, and constructing a politic out
yes.
of that to guide behavior that is ethical in the context of the collective that is being governed. And there was like always opt-in, right? And yeah, fundamentally, I think we've lost touch with that. And I think, and this is one of my qualms with the libertarianism, is that they've sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater. It's like politics is evil because statism is evil. So fuck politics altogether, and
Mm,
you create a vacuum for the scumbags to come in and run politics.
hmm.
I think that is it is a weak position to operate from. I think what needs to happen is more like a Bukele kind of thing, which is no. There's parasites. We need to move them out, and
Yeah.
the strong and the good must
Mm.
lead and instantiate, the ethics and everything that sort of matters.
It's a good point because I like Vervaeke's definition actually, where he says, markets are like the distributed cognition of humanity, right? We're all connecting our minds and solving problems in a distributed way. And he described politics as the distributed ethics that goes with that marketplace. And so I think politics at its best is that exactly what you're describing. The problem, and I am obviously admittedly jaded by, I just don't, I have a distinct distaste for politics growing up in the fiat era, basically, right? I'm still struggling to like really identify this distributed ethics dimension of politics as separate from fiat politics that I'm so accustomed
Hmm.
to. Um, but I guess the extent to which politics then is working well is the extent to which it is local, right? Because once you get into this non-local global politics, fiat war machine thing, then all of a sudden it really becomes about warmongering and breaking rules and taxation and inflation, like all these crazy things that are very distinctly unethical, right? Like obviously unethical. So maybe
Becomes
that's the problem.
parasitism.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes parasitism. So when you change the structure where originally if we come back to that the nature of politics in the early days was the citizenry were the I guess depending on the city state, if we're talking about classical Greece here, is like
Mhm.
Sparta, the citizenry were the warriors only, right?
Mhm.
In Athens it was the warriors and the landed gentry, so
Mhm.
so the people and who had skin in the game. Like now, and I think this is a big distinction, and I guess this is a Talibism, I guess, but it's something that is, it's a concept that has existed obviously long before Talib, is
Mhm.
if you make politics a framework in which you remove skin in the game, don't be
Mhm.
surprised that you create the environment for parasites to, come and
Right.
grow, right? Like if I have a dark room and it's damp and it's hot, I shouldn't be surprised that mold and shit is going to grow there, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's sort of what we've had.
Yeah.
And I struggle with this one a lot. It is objectively bad, but maybe it's just part of the nature of life experimenting with things, and we sort of have to go through this in order to reach something new
Mhm.
out the other
Mhm.
end.
Mhm. Mhm. It's a great point. Um, yeah, oh man, it's a lot to think about, but this is a theme that you go into in the prelude, actually in this next passage that I'll read sort of gets to it. But again, I'm not claiming this is the right answer, but just from the pieces that I've gathered thus far in my Bitcoin journey, it seems like the scale of politics is the problem in a way, right? It's like local politics are natural, right? People are uneven. There's going to be like the stronger men that are going to kind of lead and be the powerful warriors or whatever. Might be the kings, might be the nobility, the aristocrats, whatever. That's an occupation basically in a community. But global, when you scale that up to the global level, it becomes more corrupt and unnatural, right? You get, well, in the US, for instance, right? We have the US president, like one man sitting on the hierarchy of 330 million humans. Just doesn't seem, that math doesn't seem to work out to me. It's like we have one guy dictating. Not, of course, there's some checks and balances in place, whatever, but basically there's one executive overseeing 330 million people, the commander in chief of the most powerful military in the world. Like that seems to be a little bit out of whack. And so I think, so the scale of politics, I think, is the problem. And I think the economics of violence is what determines the scale of politics, which is largely based on the sovereign individual. So when defense is cost effective, let's say, then coercion is less profitable. So politics therefore become more local.
Mhm.
But when defense is, say, expensive, or attack is, which is to say the same thing, attack is cheap, then coercion
Mhm.
becomes more profitable and politics scales up, right? The plundering and all of this kind of scales up. So it seems to have its basis in technological reality. And this is, Bitcoin makes that coercion much less profitable. So in theory, would make politics much more local over time.
Totally.
Um,
It's technological and monetary reality. I think we live in a bit of an anomaly in terms of the degree to which politics has globalized,
mhm.
because we stumbled into fiat money.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
I don't think it was escapable. I think for example, to get to energy money, to get to Bitcoin, we had to go, like, the path, right, was through
Yeah. Zombie money.
paper gold, fiat
Yeah.
money, zombie
Yeah.
money, and all the other
Yeah.
shit, right? So like we had to get there. And I think fundamentally, you know, as you said, with that shift, with that change, there's going to necessarily come a different return on violence, basically,
Yes.
uh, which fundamentally changes the fabric of society.
Yeah. And that seems to be kind of at the bottom or near the bottom of a lot of this social transformation is just really just the flat out how the profitability of violence, right? Does this pay or not? And then society sort of configures itself around that economic calculus in a way. Okay, I'm going to read another passage here. This is actually at the bottom of page 8 going into 9. You wrote, I'm encouraged by what I've seen from the emergent behaviors and subcultures in the quote unquote cult of Bitcoin. There's strong tendencies toward homeschooling, health, nutrient-dense foods, localism, community, family, children, self-defense, self-sufficiency, and other generally life-affirming ideals. These memes turn into microcults and then become their own norms. It's a very interesting thing to behold, like watching a culture evolve in real time. It's why I laugh at those who pejoratively label Bitcoiners as quote unquote religious zealots. They don't realize that the comment is actually a compliment. A movement like this must be as religious as it is technological and economic. Bitcoin is not just quote unquote science, it is so much more. Changing the world requires changing the behavior of the people that make it up. This starts with a narrative. It starts with the adherence to a new order, believing in something not yet manifest and acting accordingly. I just thought this was great. I mean, sort of segues from what we're just talking about, but one of the most profound things about Bitcoin is that it's not just a technology, it's also a political paradigm, pseudo religion, maybe just call it a social institution to have something that doesn't have a lot of political or religious connotation. And we are, as such, human beings are part of the operating system of Bitcoin, right? Like we're literally, it doesn't work without us, right? Just like it wouldn't work without proof of work or public private key cryptography or the difficulty adjustment. Like if you pull any of those components out, it literally stops working.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is maybe why it's so hard to understand the implications of this thing, because we've created something that we're like symbiotically wedded to in a way. And if that, well, like what does that mean? I mean, it's so there has to be a religious dimension to Bitcoin, right? To the extent that Bitcoiners, at least an ethical dimension, like I don't, maybe religion's too strong of a word, but we are being incentivized as a result of Bitcoin's, I don't know, structure, structural integrity in a way, or like being hard to steal, for instance, impossible to inflate. Well, that's incentivizing people that use Bitcoin to adopt a certain set of ethical norms, right? Like, well, I'm not going to be a central banker because that doesn't make sense. Makes all the sense in the world, the fiat world. That's like literally one of the best, probably the best thing you can do economically. Makes
Well,
no
we have
sense in a
crypto.
Bitcoin world. Yeah, so your actual core values change, right? It's like I don't, because again, back to profitability. If it doesn't pay, then people aren't going to do it. So Bitcoin's this weird thing that it's almost like a system of ethics energized by economic incentives. And so that seems to be how or why it is changing us internally.
I mean, it's that. So it's something that drives behavior fundamentally. But then, I mean, there's also like I think when I wrote this, I was reading someone on Twitter like yelling about how, you Bitcoiners are stupid. And it was actually a Bitcoiner saying, it's not religion, Bitcoin is a science, just to let you know, so it's clear.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, no worries. But the thing is, I the very fact that I believe some things about Bitcoin
Yeah.
and that you believe something else about
Yeah.
Bitcoin literally tells me it is a religion. I know you said like maybe religion is too strong a word, but it
Right.
actually isn't. It's
Yeah.
fundamentally you have these. I mean, just the big block, small block faction is a set of two diverging belief systems
Right.
about what Bitcoin is. Now we
Right.
have the ossification, non-ossification crowd, two different religions or viewpoints, about Bitcoin. And
Mhm.
I think it does it doesn't do anyone a service to try and ignore that element. It's like, oh, yeah, it's not a religion, it's not a religion, it's a science, it's science, it's science. Well, it's like, the whole Tony Robbins adage, right? There's no weeds, there's no weeds, there's no weeds, and
Yeah.
the weeds are taking over your garden. Like it,
Yeah.
it obviously fucking is.
Yes.
Um, and there's positive and negative externalities to that. And this is one of the things, I guess, the older I get in life, the more I realize that, at the end of the day, everything comes with a trade-off. Like if I'm going to go to the gym and lift, the trade-off is it's going to take up my time,
Yeah.
which is scarce. I may injure myself. Who knows? We don't actually even know whether like it actually adds to our lifespan. The thing is, it probably does, but there is some element of you're using up, your body in some way.
Yeah.
So there is trade-offs, but I choose to do that because I think the positives outweigh the negatives. And
Yes.
and fundamentally with Bitcoin is like if it becomes a catalyst for a group of people who believe something about Bitcoin to also become more family-oriented, more
Yes.
community-oriented, more self-sufficient, etc. And the downside is that, they're raging lunatics that believe that Bitcoin should be ossified. Well, fuck, all right, no worries. Like you can't change that. So it's I think the net is positive, and I think ultimately, and this is I guess what I finished that paragraph on, is that we are all, at least the dimension that all of us in Bitcoin who may disagree about details, at least agree on, is that Bitcoin as a paradigm is fundamentally better and different than the non-sound money paradigm that we live in. And we have to be, by definition, conceited, stupid, arrogant, whatever you want to call us, blind enough, arrogant enough, intolerant enough to believe in something that is completely unlike what exists today. Like, anyone from outside is looking at us, these people are fucking out of their minds. Like, they're talking about $1 trillion internet funny money. Like, what's wrong with
The
these people? They're
charitable
doing
word would be
podcasts.
bold, maybe.
Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go. Exactly. So it's like, but they're looking at us like we've got podcasts, we've got like, artwork and all this sort of, we're writing fucking 10,000 books about Bitcoin and the history of money, and people are out of their minds.
Cult.
It's the cult, exactly. But the cult is real, and it's necessary for us to bring forth a world that is, just not like what we're looking at and feeling and touching at the moment.
Amen. Yeah. Every culture begins as a cult, right? It's in the word even. And so, yeah, I completely agree on all of that, that it's and there's so much that comes up here, right? What's that quote that only those that are radical enough to think that they can, crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that actually do, stuff like that.
Yeah.
The end of your little passage here too, where it starts with the adherence to a new order, believing in something not yet manifest and acting accordingly. Like that's the essence of it right there. And this is where there's the religious dimension.
Yes.
Is that it's founded on faith, right? It's founded on faith in an ideal, right? That does not yet exist and that you're probably not going to attain or realize in its fullest completion, but, shoot for the stars and you'll, if you miss, you land on the moon kind of thing. It's like working towards something that is better than where we are today. And that action and, collective action oriented towards a better tomorrow is what actually creates that better tomorrow. And so that, faith, obviously a word associated with religion a lot. I like Alan Watts' description. He said, faith is just an act of openness to the unknown, right? Rather than being closed off to it and saying, no, I'm dogmatically attached to whatever is today. You're actually open to learning. You're open to embracing new ways of doing things and, reevaluating traditions and et cetera, et cetera. And the quote I love there is it's, the bird resting on the branch doesn't trust the branch. It trusts its wings, right? It's like the people that are breaking new ground, they're trusting their own competence in a way, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to figure it out because it's definitely better. And even if I fail, well, then the people that watch me fail will learn from my mistakes and then they'll pick up the pieces and they'll do it better next time, right? This is like the entrepreneurial mentality in a way. And people that think that, oh, wow, these guys are crazy, they're talking about faith. It's like, well, guess what? Science is founded on faith too. There is no scientific justification for science. Science is founded on the faith that the way, how we establish knowledge maps onto reality, basically. And we can't prove that scientifically. We literally just have to assume that. And we have faith that the structures of intelligibility track the structures of reality. There's no scientific proof for that. That's Platonic goodness, basically. So that's the promise that is never broken. And so, there's no scientific foundation for science. Science is founded on faith in truth and goodness. So even in pure science, there is this religious dimension to the extent that faith imparts a religious dimension to any enterprise. And so I think that is like anyone that's, rational atheist, that just completely obliterates their whole set of arguments.
Totally, totally. Do you know what? I thought about this before, but I forgot to mention it, and I'll just throw it in there now. It's like, I think you mentioned, when we try and remove religion from the equation or something, something else enters. And the most classic modern example, and we mentioned the AI stuff before, is just all the AI dudes who are like mainly like radical atheists.
Yes.
They literally are trying to build an AI god, you know what I mean? That has
Yes,
like all the
right.
powers.
Yes.
It's the funniest shit to watch, and they're all
Yeah.
sitting there like bowing at the altar of AGI,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's fucking hilarious to
Yeah.
watch. And they'll sit there blue in the face telling you that you're an idiot for believing in other sort of narratives.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And we've talked about it, I think, in our prior conversations that I forget who said it, but it's something like, the humans have a basic religious impulse, right? And if you remove religion from the equation, that religious impulse gets attached to something else. Balaji has said something to the effect that when you remove God from a society, that GOV fills the power vacuum, right? And you see that, man. You see it. Like I was living in Los Angeles when the pandemic started, and people were literally, we need more regulation. We need more masks. We need more jabs. And, please tell us what to do. Like it was praying at the altar of GOV to come and solve the boogeyman that GOV himself created was like it blew my mind into shrapnel. Basically, I was like, I have to get out of here. I have to get out of here. People have lost their mind. So yeah, it's a great point. And I don't know. I guess it's people getting trapped in or really attached to language in a way that they think their definition of religion or science is just completely omits the other, but I don't know. Reality is just so much more complicated than that, right? There's going to be,
It really is, yeah.
yeah,
It's arrogant, you know what I mean? Like it's just
yeah,
it's like, oh yeah, I've figured it out, and my scientific framework knows all. And I think I wrote about this in the past, like a number of years ago, trying to differentiate between the study of matter and what matters, which you kind of
yeah,
mentioned earlier in an excerpt. And
yeah,
you just need both. That's the thing. Like humans
yeah,
are, we're unique creatures. We are machine and we are, God. I don't know, call us
yeah.
both. Like we're the
Creator, yeah,
same. Exactly. We are literally creators, and we are created. And yeah, as you said, I think it's fundamentally arrogant to think you can have one without the other. And I
yeah,
think it's a sign of humility and maturity to have a respect and appreciation for both. That doesn't mean like, you must be Christian or this like flavor of it, or you must be Muslim or you must be Buddhist. Like it's not
yeah,
like a position that you must have that, but it's like it's an appreciation. And it's also not the the flavor of, oh, I'm just spiritual, like
mm-hmm.
no,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually probably weaker than picking a flavor of religion and
Yes,
doubling down on that. But it's it's a call to appreciate that there's this is an inescapable element of existence that, as we said, you can either ignore at your own peril,
mm-hmm.
or you can look at how you can integrate into your life.
Yes. Well said. I feel like a lot, and this is where I got tremendous value from Peterson's work, right? Is that he's sort of reinterpreting religious
Mm-hmm.
stories in a more secular language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, this whole like rational atheist scientific worldview you've built up just becomes permeated with religious
Totally. Yeah.
precepts, and you're all of a sudden you're like, oh, whoa, wait a minute, religion's way more important than I thought it was.
Yeah.
And so that's maybe sort of what I'm like, obviously inspired by him. I sort of try to do this on the show, but I think one way to, like you just said, we are creators, right? Well, to create something or to be creative is to harvest the fruits of the unknown, right? Like you're literally creating something where there was nothing before, right? You've created something new, whatever that thing is. And so back to faith, well, faith is that act of openness to the unknown. If you're going to create anything new, you have to be open to the unknown. That's literally where all the new things come from, is the unknown. They can't become known and created until they've been come out of the unknown. And that might be a good secular way to understand God. It's like, just God is this, at least in one dimension, is like, it's the unknowable, right? That horizon of unknowability behind which all the new things come from. So if you're going to be and that's why he is the creator, right? Because all the creators have to harvest the fruits of creation from the unknown, something like that. So anyways, it's just like, if you're so, I mean, my challenge to anyone would be like, if you're so set in your knowing, like try to, I mean, just look into the depths of philosophy, right? Like the notion of God was not guy in the sky historically, right? The Neoplatonic philosophy and all it was never that. There's a philosophical concept that's something like what we're trying to say here. And the reason it's so difficult to say anything about it is because everything you say about God, which is the unknown, is wrong because it can't be captured in knowledge. So, anyways, it seems like a worthwhile mission though. Just getting it's humbling, right? It gets you to kind of come off your totalitarian knowledge high horse and just say, oh, wait a minute, maybe I didn't know as much as I thought I did, and there's more to learn. And then you become more open to the unknown. So
it's humbling and it's interesting, man, and it's like, at least for people, I guess, like us, right? Maybe it's not interesting to everyone.
True.
But I find a lot of meaning and joy actually in
agreed.
In exploring this stuff.
Agreed.
Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code Breedlove to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code Breedlove.
Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. I will read another excerpt of yours on page 10. You wrote, disgust with this state of affairs and to the contrary, a love of life is a big part of why I write. I am called to advocate the virtues in this book. Courage, self-control, honor, excellence, compassion, duty, responsibility, respect. They're like a magnet. They attract me. And when I see them lacking, I feel I have to say something to encourage myself and others to push through this stage of the cycle, like our ancestors did before us. We have to bear our own cross. It's our duty and responsibility to do better, to be better, and to turn this madness around. And then you go into an excerpt from the book War Speak, which I read, by the way. Great recommendation. Great book on Nietzsche for anyone that's interested. And the author writes, courage is the willingness to face great danger. Since all animal proaction presupposes such willingness, and since all proaction is an expression of superabundant vitality, courage is inseparable from superabundant vitality in animals, including the human animal. In other words, courage is the foundational shape of vital potency in animals. All other shapes of animal proaction presuppose courage. It is therefore not surprising that the warrior and the warrior's characteristic courage are always celebrated by noble morality, unquote. And I forgot, maybe this was C.S. Lewis, but he described courage as like the meta virtue, that it is the virtue from which all other virtues are born. And so I thought that was an interesting overlap that, I mean, the author here in War Speak saying that courage, this is, I mean, a virtue we see in animals, right? Courage. So how do you, I guess in writing this book, obviously you have a great emphasis on virtues. I've never heard of virtues being applied to the animal domain, but how do you look at virtue? Is it something that can manifest in animals, and in what ways is human virtue different than animal virtue?
Yeah, interesting. So one thing, as you were actually reading this, I thought of the relationship between courage and faith, actually. And courage, I guess, is the capacity to leap into the unknown, despite the fear of the unknown. So, maybe even like, faith is maybe presupposed, like maybe faith is the, like courage is faith in action. Maybe you could even,
yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah. Wow.
And like, I think it was C.S. Lewis who said that quote, or someone else, but I say it in actually the book when I start writing about the virtues, is that courage is the central theme. Every single one of them require some level of courage in order to instantiate. It requires courage to be just. It requires courage to have honor. It requires courage to have self-control and respect and loyalty and responsibility and all this sort of stuff. So it's like for me, ever since I was young, actually, long before I, had any capacity to write something like this, I remember having this little piece of jewelry, which was like I don't know, it was like an amulet or something like that, and the word on it was courage. It was my power virtue that I think I think I started calling it a power virtue of mine when I was when I did like some Tony Robbins work, like particularly I went to one of his Date with Destiny conferences, and in there's a day that you sort of select out of a bucket of virtues of the things that help define your personality and your psyche. And so from a young age, courage has always been quite important to me, and maybe that's been a reason why I have been the kind that goes out there and tries to start a business or tries to create something or tries to put myself out there. And Yeah, like when I was writing this book, the courage chapter I think is one of the longest because in there I really drew on stories from the people who shaped history, and each one of them, like, it's like, when you see real courage, like it really shakes you inside. I don't know what it is. Like
For
it,
sure.
you don't have to be told that something is courageous. It's something that sort of transcends words, right?
Yeah.
Like you see it, you feel it, and it fucking moves you. I think it's honestly, it's like for me, it's like the most powerful. It's the alpha
Yeah.
of virtues.
Mm.
And I guess to tie that into your question about like animals, it's, I mean, it's an interesting angle. Like, so the willingness to face great danger, and proaction, presupposing like that willingness means that, you could say that animals have, those that are willing to go and attack. I mean, animals clearly experience fear, right?
For sure.
So therefore, the animal that has the surplus vitality to like uh, extend beyond that fear is obviously representing some level of courage. And I think this also ties back into what we discussed earlier about feeling. I mean, courage is a feeling.
Hmm.
It's not a thought. You don't think your way into fucking courage.
Yeah.
Like
Right. For sure.
you feel your way into it. And feeling, I think, is more entwined with our animal side than it is with our cerebral side. So therefore, it it seems to me that, like, the animals can feel it. And I mean, you see it with you know, like dogs, they say, that have a big heart, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like that
Hmm.
will go and
Yeah.
protect their owner despite, like, something happening. Like,
Yeah.
uh, so I do think that is fundamentally biological and tied to that element of us. Um, so it's a good pickup. I hadn't explored that any deeper, the animal connection.
Yeah. I yeah, it's interesting to think about. I loved your quote though. Courage is faith in action. It sort of has like this ambiguous meaning in a way, right? I'm reading that as courage is faith like put into action, and then there's courage is, you know, belief in the effectiveness of action, something like that. And can't have one without the other, right? You can't be, which that's a whole trip of a question now, because then you're like, okay, well, do animals have faith or animals religious? That's but maybe it's more Nietzschean, right? Where it's just this super abundant vitality that decides, you know, it's you're doing some kind of implicit weighted value cost benefit calculation, and the animal's like, fuck it, I'm, you know, a juiced up hunter, I'm going to take this risk and go run down the gazelle or whatever the thing is. And we just interpret that like we, you know, rational animals are like, oh, look how courageous that is. But in reality, it's just this super abundant vitality bubbling over, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's an
Um,
outlet for the vitality. Yeah.
yeah. But in humans, it does seem different because when I think about like people that have deep religious faith or deep religious conviction, doesn't have to necessarily be religious, but it usually is historically. Those are the people that have attempted the greatest and most ambitious things, right? Like they're doing it in the name of their god or gods or whatever it may be. And so it seems like that as like a bedrock for that courage is a very deep faith in something. Um, which, you know, wow.
Maybe, because, like, I actually, the more I study the West, the more I believe that Christianity was great, not because it came from that region. It's because, Alexander established the link between East and West, and the Romans had the civilization, and it was the Roman, Apollonian, Martian spirit, the Western spirit, that took the concept of Christianity and actually transformed it into Christianity. Had Rome not existed, I don't think we would have Christianity today. And this, you know, I can almost hear the pitchforks coming out and like for the blasphemy, but I really do think if you look at the vitality with which Christianity spread and built civilization, it was obviously faith in there, but there was something that was almost more animalistic about it in the sense that, like Charlemagne was a warrior, man. Like, and he was basically the founding father of the Christian monarchies of the West. Like, sure, there was some, pockets beforehand. You had the Byzantines, and you had what was going on in like Rome falling apart, but it was fundamentally Charlemagne that was the genesis of what we had in the West, and he was a warrior. Like, he was a warrior king, and he was that animalistic, super abundant vitality to go out there and claim and conquer, I think was possibly, my guess, if I had to put money on it, would be that was a larger driver than just the religious faith. And I think but ultimately, I think what matters here is it's the mix of the two.
Right.
That mix of the two is what is almost like the DNA of what became the Faustian West, the modern West that became 100 times more powerful than the Romans.
Yeah.
And like that is really important. And I think, we as quote unquote Western descendants, as Europeans, fundamentally, like, if we take the lineage back, we're the ones who have established this time and time again. We did it with the Greeks, the Romans, the medieval West. We done it again with the Renaissance. Like we keep producing that because there's something there in that spark of like blending politics and religion, courage, vitality, all this sort of stuff. These virtues, these principles, and whenever we see that sort of confluence of all of that, something great emerges. And I think we're on the verge of seeing something like that again, which is obviously the whole point of why the hell I decided to write this book, is that something is shifting, something is changing. There's like it's almost like for the last, century or so, like Western man has been sleeping. The great noble warrior has been like, sleeping because he did such a great job of like establishing a civilization that is pulling the rest of the world up. And now it's like, have you ever seen that oh man, like this is reminding me of this video, the one with Chris Walken, where he's in like the bathroom and he's telling the guy about, you've got this lion, and the hyenas are coming around and they sort of like biting his heels and stuff like that. And, the lion's like, trying to sleep and trying to relax. And he tells this whole story about like, like his cubs come and like, piss him off a little bit. His lioness comes and annoys him a little bit. Then the hyenas come in and all this sort of stuff. And like everyone's kind of like encroaching and thinking that, the lion is like weak now. And he goes, that happens until the lion gets up and he fucking runs and he tears the shit out of everybody, right? Like, there's a great clip. You should actually weave it into the podcast. I'll send it to you afterwards. But it's so fucking powerful. But that's what reminds me of this, like, this Western man spirit, which I think is ready to awaken again. There's like something there. And, like, we've taken increases in taxation. We've taken like the fucking increase in the state. You have to be humiliated at the fucking airport when you're going through a fucking plane. You have to wear a fucking face diaper. Get like, it's like how many fucking insults before, there's a point, again, another visual I'm seeing is the Persians in the 300 in the movie. Like, the Persians push, and then Leonidas is like, that's it. The fucking line is drawn, and then they push back, right? Like, I feel like that is coming close. And, that's going to come from a place of not only faith, but a place of like the vitality is going to spill over and something's going to fucking ignite from that. Anyway,
that's beautiful.
Getting charged up here.
Yeah, that's fucking great. I will find that clip and we'll get it in here.
Get this lion. He's the king of the jungle. Huge mane out there. He's laying down under a tree in the middle of Africa. He's so big. He's so hot. He doesn't want to move. Now, the little lion comes. They start messing with him. Biting his tail, biting his ears. He doesn't do anything. The lioness, she starts messing with him. Coming over, making trouble. Still, nothing. Now, the other animals, they notice this. And they start to move in. The jackals, hyenas, they're barking at him, laughing at him. They nip his toes and eat the food that's in his domain. They do this, and they get closer and closer and bolder, till one day, that lion gets up and tears the shit out of everybody, runs like the wind, eats everything in his path. Because every once in a while, the lion has to show the jackals who he is.
I think that was a great segue to the next excerpt I wanted to read too. Down at the bottom of page 10, you wrote, "This is our opportunity to be the strong men of this generation. We can bring about good times, and then, just as importantly, inculcate virtues into our children so that our communities and descendants can carry humanity forward and hold it to a higher standard. The quote unquote last man stage of history is the soil rich in manure where we plant the seeds of the Ubermensch. This is the trade off. We may be both the luckiest and unluckiest generation ever to live. We get to be the founding fathers of a societal shift, possibly the largest and fastest humanity has ever experienced, but the price of admission is enduring and overcoming clown world." And that is exactly what we are living through, man. It is
100%.
surreal. I don't really know any other word other than surreal. Like, I see these things happening through the windows of digital technology and social media, and I literally can't believe it sometimes. I actually can't believe it. Like, I see these, I saw the Joe Biden commercial about, Super Bowl commercial about the price of ice cream going up, and he's wagging his finger at ice cream producers. I'm like, I really thought it was an AI spoof. I was
Yeah,
like, oh,
right.
someone spoofed this guy. And I'm like, oh no, that's real. That's real.
Yeah,
And
it's the Atlas Shrugged characters have come to life, man. I swear to God,
yes, yeah,
it's so funny.
crazy.
I mean, there's a note in this one which I've tried to fill this book with, like, mild jabs. But so for people who don't know what the last man is, right? It's Nietzsche's term of, like, basically the what I have called in the past the lemmings or the masses. It's kind of like the cynical last version of man before we transition into new age, where we, like, fundamentally have these what he calls the Ubermensch, or the overman, or a different breed of human that is more vital, strong, ascendant, etc. And the last man is characterized fundamentally by this cynicism towards greatness and beauty. It's like, and you see this everywhere, like, these climate catastrophists and, maniacs, like, going out there and, like, throwing paint and shit on, like, beautiful paintings. It's like,
yeah,
what are you doing? Like, but that's that, that cynicism, that desire to kind of, like, bring things down. And, in here I say, like, the last man stage of history is the soil rich in manure, right? So manure is what? Shit, right? Like,
yes.
that's literally, we are in a a field of shit, basically. But that makes for
Good
a
growing
great
conditions.
environment for seeds to fucking grow, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this is comes back to, as you said, like, what we're discussing before. It's like we've been pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, but there's a moment,
Yeah.
and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe the moment is not now, but I can feel something. I can feel
Yeah.
something. It's unique, and Like an interesting analogy was when Rome started to fall and it was, taken over by these tribal, ultra vital Germanic warrior clans.
Hmm.
Like they were basically nomads. Like they were people of great strength,
Hmm.
of their own norms and cultures and everything like that. And they kind of took Roman institutions, they took, Christianity as a concept, they took their own Norse and Germanic mythology and everything. They sort of blended all of that together,
Mm.
and they established what came forth as the West from there, right?
Mm.
And you kind of look at the opportunity you and I have today is like, we have the ability to be these wealthy nomads that can move around. We are taking elements of the different things that work, and I fundamentally believe we're going to set the stage for something new.
Mm.
But as I was saying here, it's like the price of doing that is going to be the fact that we have to live through this fucking shit show. But you know what? As much as we can sit here and complain about it and complain about it, and I think we did a lot of complaining in 2020, 2021,
Mm.
2022. I think we've turned a leaf, and now I've come to the point where, at least in my life, it's yeah, sure, I can look at it, I can laugh, and I can complain and all that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, I'm trying to channel that
Yes.
disgust or that
Mm.
dissatisfaction into
Mm.
something
Hmm.
new and great, and
Yes.
that's a fun feeling.
No, that's excellent. You can probably relate to this. Someone that struggled with anger off and on throughout his life. I've found the example of Christ to be the most informative for me is the idea of righteous anger, right? That take that energy that the anger gives you and channel it towards a solution, right? Don't just be angry for anger's sake. Just don't complain. Buckminster Fuller said something about this too, right? Don't, maybe not him, maybe someone else. Don't direct your energy towards tearing down the old, direct your energy towards building the new.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so the Christ thing for me was okay, there's only one time that guy actually goes physically angry. He becomes physically, visibly angry in the Bible, and that's driving out the money changers. So it's like, there is a place for that raw animal power that we all have within us, but you have to really pick your battles, right? Like Christ picked one battle, like of the whole Bible. One time did he do that. And so channeling that energy that naturally wells up within us, living in clown world, being buried in shit, as all these analogies we're using, but being very precise in where you point that energy, right? That's the key, I think. And
yeah, it's like a channeling. So
yeah.
I mean, this is definitely something I'm actively learning and contending with. And for people listening, I don't know, and maybe for even you, like I've been trying to swear less, for example, and I think I've dropped a few S bombs and F bombs here, but like it's
Yeah.
definitely like I think I've dropped that by 80%, and I think that ties into the idea that that which is scarce is more valuable, right? Like
Yes,
if
yes, yes,
every
yes. Yeah.
single time
Yeah.
something happens, you freak out and get angry, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
it's another
Right.
tantrum or whatever. But
Right.
whereas, yeah, if it's channeled and directed, it carries so much more force. And like it's literally in what you're saying. It's like you remember the one time Jesus got angry,
Yes.
publicly. Like
Yeah.
if every verse in the Bible was
Right.
like Jesus slapped someone in the face, like you'd forget. You'd be like,
Right. Yeah.
that time
Exactly.
he punched
Yeah.
someone. Yeah, which one?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's like inflation in a way, right? Like he would inflate away the meaning of his own anger, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, it is literally inflation. I mean, that's, it's funny. I don't want to take us off too far a tangent, but like the word comes from the Norse weird. And I think we've spoken about this in the past, actually. It's like it means destination. And
Hmm.
the Norse, like they were known for not speaking too much because what it was believed that what you said you would manifest into being.
Hmm.
So they would speak little because the words carried weight. And
Mm,
now the more and more and more and more we speak, the less weight the words carry. Now, obviously, times have changed. We live in a different world. We talk a lot, but it's there's something special about the person who doesn't talk a lot, but just goes and does shit,
for
you know?
sure.
And that's sometimes, I guess I'm super guilty of this, like philosophizing a lot. Is like sometimes we spend so much time talking about
Yeah.
shit, like just
Yeah. Yeah.
shut up and go and do it, right?
Yeah. Dude, completely.
It's
I get frustrated with that all the time, actually. It's like often doing because you're like, we're talking, we talk, and we talk, and we talk. And it's like you sort of arrive at kind of the same thing. It's like, you know, classical, like do your best to inculcate classical virtues and then
Yep.
act, basically, right? Like go into the world and take action, like move things. And yeah, so I'm with you on that. But then there's a lot of, but I also, as we said earlier, I get a lot of joy, and it does actually change you over time, right? As like the more you do this sort of philosophizing, all things in moderation, I guess, or in proper dosage. But it does seem to, it's led me at least to a greater appreciation for human action, right? Again, obviously the work of Mises, and then it's getting me into the work of like Nietzsche through people like you. And it's, you discover a lot there about yourself and about human species and the human condition. And that is useful in informing future action. So,
Totally.
but I'm with
It's
you, dude. I get so burnt out on words, as weird as that sounds, because like I think language is so fascinating. It's one of my number one fascinations. But then I get to this point where I'm like, okay, words are just like talk is cheap. This is ridiculous. Let's go, lift some shit or try to swing an axe or shoot a gun or something.
Totally. I mean, I think it ties into where we open the conversation about the synthesis between body and mind, right? Like, so words probably live more in the cerebral, action lives more in the body and the physical, and some blend of these, like the philosopher king meme, right? Like that's why, Alexander was a far more important philosopher than Aristotle was, because Alexander didn't only philosophize, but he went out and acted, right?
Yes,
And
yes, yes.
he put that philosophy forth. And in fact, there was arguably one of the main reasons we know Aristotle today is because Alexander
Yeah,
existed.
that's right.
Had
That's
Alexander
right.
not existed, we would have known.
Yeah.
And I think there's these few people throughout history that fundamentally shape the course of everything that comes afterwards, who were both thinkers and doers.
That's right.
And it's like it's that blend of both.
Yes.
Thucydides was those examples. Napoleon, right? He
Yeah.
was a thinker,
Hmm.
wasn't just a doer. So like, but both
Yeah.
of those really, really, really matter.
Yeah. I'd put Marcus Aurelius in there, Genghis Khan. Like these guys were, yeah, they were thinkers, right? Philosophers, really. And then also great warriors, conquerors. I was reminded too, we were saying, talking about the inflation of words, right? That line in American Gangster where he says the loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room.
Totally,
Like
man.
there's a lot of truth to that. Just the way, I don't know, people in my experience that carry themselves in a way that comports very seriously to what they do, they don't talk a lot. There's not a lot of talk, but there's very precise talk, very very moving and motivating talk, but there's not a lot of it, right? There's not a lot of just fluff. I think there's something to that. And then the other quote that what you were saying reminded me of was from Naval. He said, if you want to become a philosopher king, first become a king and then become a philosopher. Like you need to actually to kind of take action first
Yes.
for your
Yeah.
words carry weight. And yeah, it's something I think about a lot. But yeah. So I'll read another excerpt, if I may.
Yes,
This
please.
is getting kind of to the I mean, you're really talking about the purpose of this book, basically. On page 11, you write, as the world swings back toward more decentralization, fragmentation, and individual sovereignty, the need to embody these timeless virtues in order to win at the game of life will only increase. You will still be able to cheat. You will still be able to play the parasite, Some will even still play the money printing game through some sort of complex and abstracted rehypothecation. But the key difference will be A, the speed of reckoning, B, the magnitude of damage, and C, the extent of collateral damage or socialization of losses. I'd argue that the speed of reckoning will increase, the magnitude of damage will decrease, and the consequences will be more localized. In other words, you get wrecked sooner, it doesn't damage the system, and you pay the price. So, a lot more skin in the game, which is something we talk about a lot in Bitcoin, and how it reintroduces consequences to actions, right? Or at least unifies actions with their consequences in a way, right? Where we today, for instance, but you brought up Napoleon earlier, right? Napoleon led from the front, whereas today the U.S. global war machine is a few bureaucrats sitting in D.C. leading from the back, telling people at the front what to do, so they don't have skin in the game.
Correct.
Therefore, you get all of these kind of misaligned incentives and consequences. So,
yeah, I think the key thing there is the localization of the consequences, because every action always has a consequence. It's just that when you sort of detach the actors from it,
right,
so someone else just pays the consequence, right?
Someone else is paying the bill. Yeah,
exactly. So you and I are paying for these monkeys. So I always think about like if politicians had to personally pay for all of the policies that they want to think on like this,
wouldn't exist, of course.
exactly. So that's like it's the ultimate thing. And I like this excerpt that you just read. It's from a section in the book called Playing to Win. And what I tried to frame up here is that, look, the world is operating currently in a particular paradigm. We call it the fiat paradigm. We call it the parasitic paradigm, the status paradigm, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in this paradigm, there is, some rules, that are malleable, some for thee, some for me, and all this sort of stuff. But the playbook is structured so that for you to get ahead, there's things that you do that probably make civilization worse as you go. So like, you're incentivized to cheat, you're incentivized to steal, instead of producing, you're spending more time politicking, right? Instead of creating something, you're incentivized more to consume, right? So like, instead of going out there and building and constructing, you're incentivized to complain and destroy, like, and to bring things down. So like, we're in a strange paradigm, and it's one where, it's almost like, you said before about eat first, ethics later. Like we've literally, everyone is moving, like the pendulum has swung so far to such an extreme that nobody cares about ethics anymore. It's like, the playbook is like, eat now and forget about everything else.
Yeah.
Who gives a fuck? Like, it's not your problem anyway, because hey, you're just one person in this giant fucking machine that doesn't matter, that doesn't care about you. So therefore, worry about yourself, don't worry about anything else.
Yeah.
Because we're so detached. There's nothing local anymore about it, right?
That's right.
And my thing about the book was, I said, all right, if we're going to make the assumption that the world is going to move on to a Bitcoin standard because Bitcoin is this unstoppable socioeconomic technological force, if that happens, there's going to be some consequences to that occurring, right? There will be real economic incentives and disincentives to how a territory is run, to how governance models begin to operate down the track. So the very fabric or the nature of the world is going to shift. If that is the case, then the question becomes, what is the new playbook? If the current playbook on the fiat standard is lie, cheat, steal, like get ahead, step on people, fuck reputation, doesn't matter, all this sort of stuff. What's the new playbook? And my opinion, and this is sort of how I envision, and it's funny, I didn't envision it in the beginning when I started writing the book, but it kind of evolved into this, is that the Bushido of Bitcoin is the playbook for life on a Bitcoin standard. So in many ways, if Saifedean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, is sort of like the alpha of the Bitcoin space. It's like, okay, the first book, it sets the stage for the monetary reasoning behind why Bitcoin is going to become the standard.
Right.
The question that comes after that is, okay, well, now that we're here,
Now what?
how do we live?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, who do we become? What principles do we live by? And, at the end of the book, when you finally get through it and when I'm finally finished, like I say in there, it's like, look, as much as, religions and politics and all this sort of stuff are important, the thing that I've noticed that transcends even religion and politics and, norms and everything are actually virtues and principles. There's not many virtues. There is about like 10 or 15, something like that, that all religions or all politics or all of them value highly. So while we might not agree, Christians and Muslims might not agree on stuff, they both respect or they both have a reverence for honor and duty and loyalty and courage and justice and all this sort of stuff. So if that can become the glue, like it's almost like, if you've got an adversary, and two adversaries can sit there and they can kind of nod at each other, like, I know what you've been through, even though you're my enemy, like
Right.
I can respect you
Yeah.
because of the virtues you carry. That is, I think, how we will move into a world that is, I don't know, more robust, more strong,
Yeah.
more
Metastable is the
functional.
term that came up for me there, right? Because if it's localized, as you were saying, and then there's a symmetry of competence, virtue, power projection capability, that it's like a root, like I don't know, I've been to parties before, right, where it's like a bunch of boxers and UFC guys, for instance, or a bunch of professional athletes. It's like one of the most peaceful rooms in the world, right? Like no one's fucking with anybody because everyone knows everyone. It's like you don't want to fight anyone, basically. No one wants to fight anyone. And so it's very cool, like easy going. And it would be great if the world were a little more like that, right? Like I think it's kind of the principle behind universalizing gun ownership too, right? If the old saying, an armed society is a polite society. When you have a more equal distribution of these competencies, then there tends to be more peace, versus if you have a severe asymmetry, right? Someone's got all the guns and a bunch of people have none. Well, then you get atrocity, basically. So that's really interesting. And I like, as you were saying that too, that the other through line, then circling back to the beginning of our conversation between religion and politics, would be this idea of virtue, right? Is how do you actually cultivate virtue in individuals, in society? And so that was really interesting there.
Yeah, maybe that is actually the meta purpose of religion and politics.
Yeah.
It's to sit there and actually help establish virtues. If that is the goal, or if that is the meta goal,
Yeah.
as opposed to like trying to figure out ways to guilt people, because religion is very religion is, pardon the pun, guilty of guilting people,
Right.
in many ways. And I don't think that is it obviously comes with some positives, but I think the net negatives are worse. Like, and without getting into a religious conversation here, like I have some problems with like original sin and all that sort of stuff. Like I think, that doesn't do Christianity any favors. But anyway, beyond that, like, if we sort of come back to the early teachings, you see that the emphasis was around influencing behavior, and behavior is another word for how you act, and if that is oriented around, a set of virtues which we can, again, we don't all have to agree that these 10 virtues are the ones we must live by, but
Sure.
I can almost guarantee that there is a universal appreciation for courage and for and that's why I sort of like picked 10 that I found that map really well across like Japanese culture, Western culture, ancient culture, modern culture, like all this sort of stuff. And it just seemed to me that, hey, fuck, if we've kind of all done this multiple times.
Right.
And these are the virtues that have sort of preceded the cultures that have then preceded the greatest civilizations. It's probably something there.
Yeah, the consilience, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great framing. And yeah, like if you just pulled out honesty as one of the virtues, right? Well, in religion, we have thou shalt not bear false witness, for instance, in Christianity. And then in more of the political / legal sphere, you have people, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God, right? So again, there's a distinct practice or a codification of trying to get people to be honest, basically. And that serves not only, often that doesn't even serve the individual's interest, right? The individual may not want to be honest because they need to hide or, they're scared of the consequences. But getting people to abide by that virtue in general definitively serves the greater good, if you will. And so if, as you were saying, like, inculcating good behavior or good action, well, if action is the use of means to attain ends, ethics is telling us what ends to aim at, basically, right? Like, oh, we should try to be honest because that serves people in general, not just, people, not every individual in every instance, but it serves society more generally. Anyways, yeah, that was a good riff on that. I want to be respectful of your time. How much time do you have?
Let's do one more excerpt and then we
Okay.
can wrap it up. Yeah.
All right. So then we should probably, I'll just jump to the end. We've talked a lot about equality and all of the problems with that in past episodes. So we probably skip that. And I'll just go to the last little excerpt here. So this is the actual end of the prelude you wrote. This is down on page 20. The heights of our heroism will be found in the establishment of a sound order that reaches back in time, drawing wisdom and stability from the traditions of the past and projects forward into a new age. One when we look upwards toward a brighter and more desirable future. An age in which we once again explore and expand our territories, coming face to face with new frontiers, the way we are compelled to when life is pulsating through us. This is what I want to show you in the pages that follow, a playbook for a new world on a Bitcoin standard, the Bushido of Bitcoin. And then you complete with a quote from William Shakespeare, who said, "Be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and others have greatness thrust upon them." Yeah, so it's a real call to action. And what I really like is this, there's the visualization that I have, and I think you see this in nature, actually. I'm getting this from Brandon Quittam's piece on mycelium, right? Where he talks about a mycelial network learns at the edges in a way. So, obviously it's confronting the environment, which is both novelty and threat. It's either food or, adversary, I guess, that it's encountering at the edges. And it's learning and adapting to consume that food or neutralize those threats. But then at the core of the mycelium, there's like the basic pattern, right? That the more static pattern of the organism itself. So it's dynamic at the edges and learning and changing and adapting, but there's the core of it that's more static. And that's the visual that came up for me as you're talking about, like, a society that's rooted in its traditions of the past, right? Like, we have a conservative core. These are the virtues we've discovered that work. This is the English, not just English common law, right? Laws we've discovered that work to resolve disputes over vast spans of time. Even sound money, right, would go in here. Like, we've learned that sound money leads to a more stable society. So you have all of this like conservatism at the core, but then we have entrepreneurship and experimentation and all of these things at the edges, right? Where the entrepreneurs play and innovate and figure out new things. And that sounds like, obviously that's very abstract, but that abstraction, I think, is how we want, kind of like the design principles we want in our society, right? You want the best of both worlds in a way, right? You want a conservative core that is robust to change, um, because it's, using what is tried and true, but then you want experimentation at the edges so you can adapt to what is new and figure out new things and continue to progress. So, um, yeah,
Yeah,
I thought those.
the visual for me is like a tree, right? Like you want some deep roots and you want the you want to have a strong trunk, and like it's the the trunk is thicker than the branches for a reason, right?
Yep.
Like
Right.
it's not going to be the other way around. And I think this is actually one of the you know, a lot of people have been triggered by my comments on psychedelics and all this sort of stuff where I try and like, push people. And it's not that I'm like, for example, anti-psychedelics. Like, I've done them multiple times, I've had nothing but great experiences. But what I sort of see in the modern world amongst, psychedelic pundits is that they frame it as like some sort of panacea or like solution to stuff. And,
Right.
fundamentally what a psychedelic does to you is it kind of breaks the conservative core, like it
Right.
uproots you. And
The
that's
default mode
useful
network,
for
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So in doing so, it's great for like experimentation, but if you consistently do that, you lose your default mode network. It's not that like, they framed the default mode network as a bad thing. It's like, okay, you have a default mode network, so you should uproot that shit every 6 months or every 3 months or whatever, right?
You're never
It's
gonna
like,
have
well
any
then
stability. Yeah.
exactly, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So you
Yeah.
kind of, you need the roots, and like, people who do it all the time, for example, I envision them as pot plants, right?
Mm.
Like you're a pot
Yeah.
plant, you haven't, created depth of your roots. And I think this is my point is like modern society is almost like a new age hippie that is always on a new drug, right?
Mm.
Is like we are every single brain fart that we get, we try and like revolutionize stuff. And the left hemisphere, which really maps well with leftist politics, actually, is very
Hmm.
much like it's a deconstructionist uh,
Yes.
hemisphere. It's
Right.
it's something that believes it's right. It doesn't see the holistic picture, the Gestalt and all this sort of stuff. And it's really funny. I was reading a tweet today which reminded me about the stupidity of the French Revolution. When the revolutionaries took over and they beheaded the king and all this sort of stuff, and they uprooted civilization. They threw away the baby and the bathwater and everything altogether. They had this brilliant idea of changing the day to like a decimal version. So they got rid of hours and they had like I think it was 10 seconds and like, oh, sorry, 100 seconds in a minute. And then it was like 10 hours in a day or
Mhm.
something like retarded like that. So, you know, it was this, it's just, it sounds like a joke, but it's real. So it's like throw away everything that has worked for the last X amount of thousands of
Mhm.
years because someone had this brain fart that, all right, we can just revolutionize everything and start again. And it doesn't work that way. Like,
Right.
like humanity compounds, information
Yes.
compounds,
Right.
wealth compounds, principles compound, and there's these sort of like threads that have lasted a long time for a reason because they
Yeah.
work.
Right.
And no amount of new age thinking and hippies and like uh, psychedelic trips is going to sort of like
Right.
lead you elsewhere. Like you don't need to reinvent everything. And I should also balance that with the fact that it is very easy to get stuck in a way and not adapt and not evolve. And this is why we fundamentally have two brain hemispheres. We
Yeah.
have the right and we have the left. There is
Right.
and as you kind of said, the edges are for exploration. The core is for stability. You need both. We have these extremities called arms and legs, which are made of different muscle fibers than the core is made of, and
Yes.
they serve different function, right? So, when you sort of start to appreciate things in a more holistic fashion, you realize that you need both. Like the past teaches us a lot. And sometimes I think people, quote unquote, on the right and the return kind of people, like
Mhm.
that are always talking about we need to go back to the
Yeah.
past. Sometimes they get caught up in, the alternate trap of the leftists, which is we have to go back. And in fact, as I was writing this book, I caught myself many times making that point. It's like, we must go back. And then I
Right.
was like, no, no, you know what? It's actually not about going back. It's about taking what worked, finding those threads, those principles. And for me, the big thread that I found across all of these civilizations and cultures and everything was the overlap of the virtues. So let's take that. That's probably the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
If we can grab that with all of the stuff that we can do in the modern world, and we were talking about this before, like the analog of what we Bitcoiners will be able to do in the world,
Yeah.
similar to what the Germanic tribes did post Rome, is we'll be like, if we have those virtues and principles and this sort of understanding of like, left brain, right brain, of, left
Mm-hmm.
and right orientation, like
Yeah.
if we can synthesize all of this, the body, the mind, these principles, etc., man, we're going to be the genesis of the Ubermensch, the genesis of the Superman, the genesis of of a new breed and class of individual that can and will take civilization to the stars. Because that's the next step change, right? We went from Rome to the US. Whatever the fuck comes next is going to the moon or to the
Yes.
stars, to Mars, right? And that's going to require a synthesis of a lot of these things.
It's beautifully said. Man, so much there. Just according ourselves with nature, right? I mean, evolution itself is this conservative process. It keeps what works, and then there's slight adaptation at the edges. And, it's not always the most efficient thing necessarily, but it definitely is robust, right? It's even anti-fragile, to use the Talebian term. And, the trunk, as you said, that in the tree metaphor, the trunk of the tree is thicker than the branches for a reason, right? It's the same reason a business needs a strong balance sheet, right? It needs that conservative core of savings and assets. And then the P&L is like the edges, right? Like what's actually happening in time. Are you accretive to the balance sheet, or are you
Mm-hmm.
dissipative? Just like the branches and the leaves are like literally the P&L of the tree, right? They're gathering sunlight to feed the growth of that trunk. And so, yeah, there's this massive dose of humility that comes with looking at it that way. That what does Peterson say? Before you criticize the world, clean up your room, right? It's like, or this might be Taleb too. I'm not sure who said it, but he said, like, if what you think is at odds with what nature says or is or does, assume you're wrong, basically,
Mm-hmm.
because you're just one. Like the odds that you're right where nature is wrong are like astronomical, basically. So things that, if it's a long-standing tradition, and by the way, we have to take this too, right? As
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoiners, we're very
Mm-hmm.
critical of social institutions and central banking. It's like, well, these things are a lot older than us. Maybe there are some benefits that we're not aware of. And, I don't know. I try to think about that. I struggle to find them. My room is pretty clean, so I feel good about criticizing central banking. But it's something that you always have to have, right? You always need to have that perspective that, well, you're basically probably wrong. Anytime you're talking about something that's older and bigger than you, you're probably wrong. So,
Mm-hmm.
anyways, yeah, I don't really have anything on that, but just those are things you're sparking in my mind as you were saying that.
Absolutely, dude. It was a great rip. I look forward to exploring all the different sections of the book with you, man. It's always a pleasure. Being able to riff with someone who like I feel like you and I could almost have a conversation about anything.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, that's probably why you are one of the most recurrent guests on this show. It is always a blast to talk to you. And then I've told you before, but I'll say it again. As someone who's followed your writing from the beginning, I mean, I don't know the beginning since we met in 2017, I guess.
Yeah,
I
17,
mean,
yeah.
the quality of your writing is 10 times better than what it was. Like you see the proof of work. And yeah, hat tip to you, my friend. It's really good. So I'm excited
Really
to read the final copy and talk to you about it on the show.
appreciate it, man. That really means a lot, especially coming from you, bro. And yeah, I'm gonna keep pushing into it and trying to make it the best it can be. And yeah, as I said, look forward to dissecting all of it. Like, can't wait till we get into the virtues and some of the stories. but it's gonna be a lot of fun, man.
Awesome, brother. Well, thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, bro.